Hello, salams and greetings to everyone tuning in. I am Yvonne Ridley, and this is my first podcast with WTX News. Each week, I'll be taking a look at some of the hot topics thrown up around the world. And today's focus is on political prisoners, who they are and where they're being held and why. You might be surprised by some of the interviews. For instance, did you know that this month marks the 20th anniversary of the opening of the Gulag, which is known as Guantanamo Bay, the US detention facility? Its grim legacy is marked by the detention of nearly 800 men and boys, the majority of them held without charge, without trial, and going through years of torture and other cruel and inhumane treatment. And talking of anniversaries, did you also know that the world's longest serving political prisoner has just chalked up his 40th year behind bars? Now imagine that, 40 years. I mean, when you consider the world's most famous political prisoner, Nelson Mandela, he served just over 27 years in prison. And this guy has chalked up his 40th anniversary this month. Meanwhile, closer to home, my Premier Division football team makes headline news for all the wrong reasons. Find out why Newcastle United is linked to overseas prisoners held by a regime which will jail you for a tweet if they don't like what you send. I also speak to a former inmate who has drawn up prisoners' rights charters after hearing the screams of torture victims in adjoining cells in the Syrian prisons where he was held. And I can tell you, for once, it wasn't the dirty work of the Assad regime. Finally, which country in the world locks up journalists? Well, actually, quite a few. But there's one in particular that made legal history just recently for sending someone down for his court reporting. But today's show opens up with former Guantanamo detainee Moazzam Begg. So let's get his view on the Gulag in occupied Cuba, where he spent nearly 3 years of his life.
It was forced out of them that it showed that the British government knew we were being tortured and was sending agents of the MI5, MI6, and questions to us while we're being tortured.
Salam alaikum, Moazzam. Long time no see. Yeah, there's an anniversary that's come up this month, which very few people seem to know about. Can you tell me what it is?
Yes, Yvonne. It's the 20th anniversary since the first prisoners were sent to Guantanamo in those signature orange jumpsuits that the world now has seen, and those notorious images of men kneeling with their faces, their mouths, nose, and ears covered, and US soldiers standing astride and above them. And it's unbelievable because there's still 39 prisoners there, and the majority of whom have either been cleared for release or are in this ridiculous category called forever prisoners, which is, and to quote, they are too dangerous to release, according to the US government, and too innocent to charge. It's this continuation of this kind of black hole that exists. And then there's a handful of people who are facing trial by military commission, And the military commission process itself has been described by many senior jurists around the world as a kangaroo court system. And those facing charges under the military commissions include people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the alleged mastermind of 9/11, who for 20 years has not been successfully prosecuted for the very reason Guantanamo was set up and the war on terror began in the first place.
Well, what can ordinary people do about this? Because, Barack Obama said he was going to close Guantanamo down. It never happened. Donald Trump said he was going to put more bad people in Guantanamo. It never happened. What about Biden? What's his position?
Well, Biden was the vice president when Obama made that statement that he will close the Guantanamo down and had signed the executive order. So it's part of his kind of legacy, at least as a Democrat. He's expressed that he wants to close it, but then so did President Bush, who opened the place in the first place. And actually, Bush released more prisoners than anybody else, though he put the majority in to begin with. Disturbingly, Biden has only released one prisoner, Abdul Latif Nasser, a Moroccan, since his tenure as president. There have been a whole bunch of prisoners who've been cleared for transfer and or release, and that is promising under Biden. But again, the problem is that there are some prisoners who have been cleared for release. There's one in particular who's been cleared for 10 years, and he's still sitting in Guantanamo. So cleared for release by a series of U.S. State Departments doesn't necessarily mean freedom. And just today, I saw a message from Clive Stafford-Smith, one of the lawyers representing some of the Guantanamo prisoners. He spoke of a young man called Jawad Rabbani, who is 19 years old, lives in Pakistan. He has never seen his father in his life because his father is held without charge or trial in Guantanamo. So what we can and should do is, of course, agitate, press the U.S. government for a final closure. We should put pressure on our governments to tell the United States that really this is enough. You cannot be in a moral position to talk to anybody else about human rights violations when you hold people for 20 years without charge or trial after they've been tortured.
Are these political prisoners?
I think the status of these prisoners has gone from, as we were called when I was myself held in custody, from enemy prisoners of war, which lasted literally a day because that would have required giving us rights under the Geneva Conventions, to enemy combatants who have no rights under U.S. law, whoever, like this black hole that's been created in the war on terrorism, to prisoners of conscience, to detainees. Sorry that the term that's been used is still used ridiculously. The term detainees is used. So, though actually they are political prisoners, because in fact I would say, not even political prisoners, I would say that they are just innocent men held without charge or trial for the most part. Those who would be political prisoners who are there for a political cause and said that they are there, for example, as those who fought against the US or wanted something. But the majority are actually not even charged with a crime.
You were one of these prisoners of conscience. Nearly 3 years of your life spent in Guantanamo. Of course, you were completely exonerated on release, and I think the British government even gave a wedge of money to you and other British prisoners. Have you had an apology at all?
No. I mean, the only reason why the British government even gave us anything that would resemble compensation, it was because it was found through, whilst we had to literally drag them through court. They defended themselves at the cost of, I think, 50 odd million pounds with 60 barristers. And it was forced out of them that it showed that the British government knew we were being tortured and was sending agents of the MI5, MI6, and questions to us while we were being tortured. So when this was forced out of them, they capitulated at court and sued for a discussion, or not sued, but actually said that we want to stop you suing us. So yeah, there's been no apology, of course, not from the Americans. There's been nothing to anybody. The only thing that's ever happened is that once, about 10 odd years ago, I met with a former, the former Minister for U.S. Homeland, the Undersecretary for Homeland Security, alongside a U.S. general, and he met with me and some former Guantanamo prisoners. And in private, this guy, he said, he golfs with Bush, and I think he's now the senator of Arkansas, and he said in private that we would like to start the process in which we could start to say sorry. That's as close as it's ever got, I think, to anyone. I've never heard any U.S. official apologize for what essentially are war crimes against the prisoners.
So 20 years on, this gulag, as Amnesty International called it, is still open. The hundreds that have been released are still seeking justice or some form of closure. Good luck with your continued campaigning. I know you're the outreach director for CAGE, an advocacy group which was launched on the back of Guantanamo. Is this a campaign that CAGE is continuing with?
Yeah, so we've just come to near to the end of something called the International Witness Campaign, that has run from literally September the 11th to January the 11th and beyond. And these two dates, of course, September the 11th is a notorious date when the war on terror kind of began, and January the 11th was when the first prisoners were sent to Guantanamo. So it's this long period of time where we partnered with over 40 different organizations across the world. We've had book festivals, poetry festivals, discussions, debates, former Guantanamo soldiers taking part in those discussions. All, of course, everybody focusing in on how Guantanamo has shaped how the world views the United States of America, and has been a black stain on anyone that claims to defend human rights and freedom. So that's been part of our campaign. We're still doing it. We've just had, over a couple of weeks ago, we had the first time we got together prisoners from all over the world, from Morocco, former prisoners, Canada, Mauritania, the UK, Libya, Turkey, and had a discussion of just former prisoners, which I was honored to host. Many of whom I know that you know and have met. And it was just a pleasure to bring these people together to talk about an experience, a period of time that has shaped all of our pasts, presents, and futures.
Well, let's hope that justice is delivered sooner rather than later. Moa Zambeg, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Palestine is always the issue, wherever you live in the world today, thanks to the tireless heroes like my next guest, Mick Napier. Today, he shines a light on the longest serving political prisoner in the world, a Palestinian who has just entered his 40th year behind bars. He should have been released as part of the 1993 Oslo Accords, but we know Tel Aviv has a habit of breaking its promises.
Because Israel pretends it's a democracy, for Palestinians from the West Bank and from Gaza, they don't have any rights whatsoever. Every Palestinian from the West Bank is a political prisoner. There's no such thing as a criminal prisoner.
Today's subject is about political prisoners. And you have quite an astonishing case in your hands about the world's longest serving political prisoner. Can you tell me who he is and how long he's been in prison?
Kareem Younis entered his 40th year of detention in the Israeli system a few days ago. He is... When Palestine was divided, was partly conquered by the Zionists in 48, some people, the majority, had to flee for their lives, but some people were trapped inside Israel when the walls went up. And Kareem Younis's family was one of those families. So he is an Israeli citizen, a citizen of the State of Israel. He joined Fatah to resist the dispossession of his people. That dispossession was taking place from 48 onwards, right across the area that Israel had conquered. But he's alleged to have attacked some Israeli soldiers, occupation soldiers in the occupied Golan, a right enshrined in international law. But I think that's less important. That's enshrined in every decent morality. That if people attack, conquer, occupy, dispossess, and carry out grotesque crimes against your people, you're allowed to resist. Kareem did that. He was captured by the Israelis, and he's now entering his 40th year of incarceration, which Amnesty says is blighted by systemic torture. In fact, Israel's the only country in the world where, it's not the only country where torture is practiced, by no means, but it's the only one where it's been legalized, legally sanctioned by the Supreme Court. So 40 years, Nelson Mandela elicited, when you talk about his time in Robben Island, it elicits gasps of disbelief. That was 22 years for Mandela fighting that apartheid. Kareem is almost double that now, but he's in his 40th year. And he's a political prisoner, jailed for resisting apartheid and dispossession.
Now, you're one of the co-founders of Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and is your team going to be doing anything about this case?
Well, it's difficult to do very much, to be honest. The Israelis are brutal. They actually agreed during the Oslo process to release the Younis cousins as part of a prisoner swap during that deal, and thus Kareem is in his 40th. His cousin, I forget his cousin's name, Maher Younis, is in his 39th year. He was captured and sentenced a few months after Kareem. But we know a lot of people who've been in Palestinian, in Israeli prisons across Palestine in 48 and in the West Bank for very, very long periods. What we can do is to honor them. And I think one way to do that is to write, is to communicate, is to tell them that they're not forgotten. Because what prisoners tell me is that prison is terrible. It's a horrible, horrible place. But it becomes bearable when you know that you're not forgotten by those on the outside. And one letter
that they can write to, or is this something that you can read about on your website?
Yes, we have an address for Kareem's lawyer. Because Israel pretends it's a democracy, for Palestinians from the West Bank and from Gaza, they don't have any rights whatsoever. Every Palestinian from the West Bank is a political prisoner. There's no such thing as a criminal prisoner. They don't get any rights to a trial. What do you call a legal system for Palestinians from the West Bank with virtually 100% conviction rates? So it's not a justice system, it's a processing system. But because Israel pretends it's a democracy, it has to concede the fiction of equal rights to Palestinian citizens of Israel. Send us an email, we'll send it to his lawyer. His lawyer is allowed to seek it. It's a hell of a story. His lawyer's his brother. Kareem's lawyer is his brother. What a family. And his brother visits him twice a week, and he's allowed to share emails with Kareem. So if you want to cheer up somebody who's in jail for his 40th year, there's not much we can do. All pen a note, or a longer letter if you wish. Some notes, some stories about how Israel is really, really unpopular around the world.
So if we go on your website, we can get the details or send the emails to SPSC.
Yeah, what I'll do, Yvonne, what's the easiest? I can go on now and take it off the website, but I can send it to you for you to send out to all the people who listen to what you have to say.
We'll definitely do that. Well, thank you very much.
Because, sorry, after you, Yvonne.
Well, just thank you very much for sharing this story with us, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again to hear about more tales of injustice against Palestinians.
There's so much that you could say about these prisoners. They're actually jailed for betraying citizenship. Now, your readers, your viewers may want to sting as Israeli citizenship, that they're forced to an inferior status inside the Israeli legal system by virtue of their being Palestinian. The whole thing's a charade. There's medical neglect, there's torture. The EU and the UK occasionally protest, but they keep on sending weapons and doing sweetheart deals. So yeah, it's a terrible story, but let's send them a message to say that they're not forgotten. It makes an enormous difference.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mick, for that. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Yvonne. Take care.
A man on a mission, the former ambassador risked his life and lost his job when he blew a whistle on one of Britain's most odious allies, Islam Karimov, a man who tortured people by boiling them alive in water. If the British government thought that Murray would disappear quietly, they were wrong. He often holds truth to power, but his last stint as a journalist covering the Alex Salmond trial, in which the former First Minister was cleared and exonerated, writing about that trial cost Craig Murray his liberty. He talks to me about that experience and references the plight of another famous political prisoner, Julian Assange.
And that's a kind of attack on freedom of speech we haven't seen in Scotland quite literally for hundreds of years.
Craig, the last time I saw you was on the prison steps, emerging after a few months inside prison. Can you tell our viewers what that was all about? Because not all of them, you know, are from Scotland.
Yes, I was imprisoned for contempt of court. I spent 4 months in jail. And the reason given for my imprisonment was that I published accounts of the trial of Alex Salmond, which gave the defense case, which was not otherwise available to anybody. And that in doing so, I published details of the case, which, if taken with other information in the public domain, could lead some people to be able to identify who were some of the accusers. That was the reason. It's called jigsaw identification, and I'm the only person in the world, I believe, ever to be imprisoned for it.
What does this say about Scotland? Because this is not the general image that the rest of the world has about Scotland.
Nobody, in fact, had been sentenced to prison for contempt of court as a journalist since 1971. I believe was the last time. It's extraordinary. I mean, for a country to start imprisoning journalists is really quite worrying. And there are several facets of the judgment which are extremely concerning. The judge said basically that as soon as the Crown, the prosecution, asked me to remove articles, I should have removed them. That is giving the Crown the power of immediate censorship and saying you may go to jail if you don't comply with an order from the Crown to remove an article. I mean, that's a kind of attack on freedom of speech we haven't seen in Scotland quite literally for hundreds of years.
I mean, also very Big Brother style, and people are drawing parallels with the Julian Assange case. And I know that you've become quite a vocal critic of that case as well.
Yes, and I think there are parallels. And of course, there's no doubt that my connection to Julian, who I know, and my coverage of his trial, and of the appalling attack of freedom of speech that represents, and the use of the United States Espionage Act to try to criminalize journalism. I think my activity on all that certainly didn't predisposed the state to look kindly upon me. So I think you could argue that the attack on me and the attack on Julian was part of the same attack. But the other point in the court judgment against me I'd like to emphasize is that it's stated specifically that mainstream media and bloggers or new media should be treated differently by the law. And it said that mainstream media, and it used the phrase mainstream media, are more ethical because they are self-regulated compared to new media, who apparently are not ethical at all and are terrible human beings compared to the entirely virtuous mainstream media. And that again is an astonishing judgment, you know, that basically bloggers or podcasters should be treated by a different legal standard to the corporate and state media. That's very strange. And the whole notion that the mainstream media is ethical is just one that the vast majority of people will not recognize.
Now, then, you spent 4 months in prison, and when you emerged, you said with a bit of a wry smile that you'd left behind a gift for the prison library, which has now probably got the most radical collection of books in any penal system in the world. Can you tell me a bit about that and who gave you the books?
Yes, I mean, I think worldwide there was a fair deal of shock at my imprisonment. And over 3,000 individuals wrote to me while I was in jail, literally from all over the world, from every country you can think of. People wrote to me to support me, you know, while I was in jail. And many of them sent me books. One of the many appalling things about the Scottish prison system is you're not allowed to receive books. And I came to an agreement with the prison governor that the books sent to me would be donated to the prison library and I could access them from there. And of course, you know, many of these books were from radical political thinkers. So Stockton Prison Library now contains literally hundreds of books on everything from you know, a communist critique of foreign policy to modern monetary theory to human rights books about the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, it has really quite a spectacular radical library in there.
Right. So after 4 months in prison, is this the end of it?
Well, obviously, you know, this is an extremely scary precedent. It's particularly scary for people like yourself who are operating in new media now. And it's you know, a very bad precedent that stops people reporting the defense in trials, which hands a huge power to the state, because of course it's the state that prosecutes, and if nobody's allowed to say what the defense is, then that opens the door to yet more state persecution. So we have to try to overturn this. We are still trying within the Scottish legal system. We actually have a hearing tomorrow at the High Court because I was given no right of appeal. In fact, an appeal was specifically declined, and we're now having a hearing tomorrow at the High Court as to whether I ought to have a right of appeal in Scotland. And we're also going to the European Court in Strasbourg, and we have to lodge our appeal there by the end of the month. So no, we're by no means letting this rest, because it's just an awful infringement on freedom of speech and journalism in Scotland.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your time with us. Good luck with all the appeals, and no doubt we'll be back in touch again to continue following this story. Craig Murray, thank you very much.
Thank you.
My guest, Bilal Ithkaran, is a Libyan Scot who is head of Sanaa, a human rights group which puts the focus on one of the most notoriously secret kingdoms in the world today, run by its de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Political prisoners there are never seen and rarely heard. Bilal talks about the soft power used and abused by Saudi around the world as it tries to sweep its human rights abuses under the carpet.
bringing about some sort of change, some sort of relief, even if it's just for Dr. Ahmed Mustafa, even if it's just for him, bringing some relief for him, than what Boris Johnson will ever do.
Assalamu alaikum to Bilal Ithkaran, who is the CEO of Sanaa, quite a relatively new pressure group or advocacy group on the political prisoner front. Can you tell me a little bit more, Bilal, about the organisation and what sort of prisoners and which country you're targeting?
So Sanaa as an organisation was initiated last March. So we're about 6 weeks short of finishing our first year. And it was set up to look at and focus on the detention of political prisoners and detainees in Saudi Arabia in particular. And we're talking about, not talking about any old detainee or any old prisoner, we're talking about detainees or prisoners who have been locked up for giving their opinions, criticising something that they felt was wrong. So people that are just, who are in essence prisoners of conscience, as it would be. And it's about trying to raise their profile. They
haven't gone through any sort of judicial process.
In certain instances, they have gone through judicial processes. In certain instances, the problem is that these processes are marred by a lot of flaws, various human rights violations, lack of parity when it comes to evidence. Statements and confessions under duress. There's claims of torture by some of those who are detained. Unfortunately, judges, when such claims are made, ignore those claims, and no inquiry is required or is carried out, and they're just allowed to pass. The main issue is that a lot of, in fact, the vast majority of these cases, where it is a matter of opinion or prisoners of conscience, they'll bring up some charges that aren't true. They'll bring about charges that are trumped up on evidence that's trumped up. And sometimes when there are charges there are elements that are ignored. So, taking a person's age of a certain crime is ignored if they were a minor, if it doesn't fit in with the government agenda.
Now, I know that you've really helped me with my mentor and friend, Dr. Ahmed Mustafa, a leading architect, possibly the godfather of architects in Saudi. And you were able to get quite a bit of information about him that I wasn't aware of. So you've obviously got people working behind the scenes in this very secret kingdom.
We have to be very careful with the information that we release, ensuring that we release it in a way that it does not in any way expose where the information is coming from. Because, the people that are providing us with this information are risking their lives. They're risking their liberty. They're risking being held in prison, risking being, caught up on some charges of treason or something, and possibly even execution. And, this is not something that's beyond the realms of reality when it comes to the Saudi regime.
Well, we thank those courageous people, but how many political prisoners are there in Saudi? And can you tell us about the more high-profile ones as well that people will recognise?
With regards to how many, you really it's impossible to tell. The Saudi authorities don't provide any statistics. You'll know yourself that it was almost impossible for someone to get information about Dr. Ahmed Mustafa, whether or not he's been detained or not. We know he's detained, but to get something official from someone in the government, it's it is almost impossible. You know, you're really up against it. So to find out exactly how many are being held in the various prisons is almost possible. And if you could go on our website, and we've got a little profile on each one of these prisons, you know, be it Dahban or any one of the other prisons that they have there. So I mean, we estimate it's probably over 1,000. But how many? It's just impossible to tell. It's just so opaque in the way that the judiciary and the secret services act in that country that you just cannot tell. And there is no central office for statistics that will provide you with such information. There is no Freedom of Information Act request that you can make to get that information released.
Are you not endangering their lives further by highlighting individuals?
Okay, so this is a really interesting point. Now, one of our trustees, Abdullah Alghandi, who I'll speak about a bit later on, he, you know, in our launch last year, he quoted a discussion with Pharaoh. It's not a real discussion that happened, but the question was asked of Pharaoh, why were you so free? Why did you feel that you could just carry on oppressing the people? And his response was, I never found anyone to resist me. And this is really important that when you don't resist, that you're complacent and you're giving the green light to the tyrant to carry on. It's like, yeah, carry on, you can do this. It's fine. We won't do anything about it. So that's on one side. On the other side, what we have found is that when a person who's gone missing, and we found out what prison he's in, and then we've spoken about it, we tweeted about it or whatever, the situation for that inmate changes. All of a sudden, he now has rights. Previously, he was kept in the dark. And in the dark, you can do whatever you want with an individual and no one is any the wiser. But when people know that this person is with you, the Saudi authorities now have to check their steps and their actions. That's not to say that they totally respect public opinion, but it will rein them in a bit. It's, you know, their fire will still burn, will continue to burn, but will dampen the fire a bit that they use to torture these inmates. So it actually works in their benefit, and it's important. You know, the more the people speak about the transgressions of this government, the more they get exposed, the more pressure will be forced upon them by various international governments. Biden has tried a little bit to do his piece, but if you can imagine, more and more people, more and more human rights organizations are aware of what's going on in there, and they're pressing their governments to actually take action against the Saudi government. Then it does put pressure, and we've seen the pressure bear fruit. An example is in America, the congressman for Virginia, his name escapes me at the moment, but he brought forth what they call the Khashoggi bill, named after the slain journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who was killed in Istanbul in the Saudi embassy. Now, in that bill, one of the things that was highlighted was to punish the Saudi regime for targeting dissidents or their families. Now, prior to this act, or prior to it being proposed to Congress, it was normal practice within Saudi Arabia that if someone is wanted or is detained or is sentenced to prison for political reasons, then their families are put on a no-fly list and they're banned from flying abroad. This is standard practice. However, since that the passing of that act in Congress, it's still not law yet, there's been a change in policy. Not only have they stopped adding people to this list, they've began and initiated a process of removing people from that list. So international pressure does bear fruit. It does bring about change. And the more of this that can happen, the freer people will be in Saudi Arabia.
Now, I was really conflicted recently when my football club, the club that I've supported all my life, Newcastle United, was bought by the Saudi PFI fund. And I was wondering, what message would you have for Newcastle United fans who want to see their team do well. It's been disastrous for more than 50 years, and now we've overnight become the richest club in the world, and we want to see the team do well. But, you know, this is with Saudi money, and one of the messages in our campaign to get Dr. Mustafa's case highlighted was, you can buy our club, but you can't buy our silence. What can Newcastle United fans do to help Sanaa and all the political prisoners?
I mean, I totally understand the Newcastle United fans' frustration with Mike Ashley. I mean, I'm a Liverpool fan. We had Gillette and Hicks for about 6 years, and it was horrendous. And they were nowhere near as bad as Mike Ashley. I mean, you know, Kareem used to be a good outdoors brand until Mike Ashley got his hands on it, and now it's a brand that I personally no longer buy. The quality just isn't the same anymore. So I totally understand the Newcastle United fans' elation at getting rid of Mike Ashley, and you know, questions have to be asked of the Premier League, how they allowed the PIF to take over the club. You know, the fit and proper test. I mean, you know, what are the criteria? I mean, it's biggest belief how you could have a man who American CIA have basically said was responsible for the murder of a journalist to all of a sudden be an owner of a football club. It's, you know, it's a strange one. It's a very, very strange one. We all know money talks.
The Premier Division, and there are some pretty unsavoury characters.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
You know,
Man City. No, I mean Man City. I mean, the UAE lot. So it's but Newcastle United fans. I mean, look, PIF took over Newcastle United, and they spent millions. They're going to spend more millions, hundreds of millions. You know, we're talking. You know, they're already at $1/3 billion in expenses. They've spent. I don't know how much they're going to spend on the Formula One. They've spent, I think, something like 29 million euros a year to host 4 La Liga, Spanish Super Cup games in Saudi Arabia, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, which fans? I mean, you're not going to have any of the Spanish fans there. But anyway, golf, tennis, they're trying so many different sports music festivals. They're trying to whitewash, sports washing. Grant Liberty done an excellent report on the whole sports washing, how much Saudi Arabia is going to spend on sports washing and trying to improve its image abroad. And it has been working for it. You know, even now with the film festival recently as well, last month. But with Newcastle, it's been slightly different. With the Formula One, it's been slightly different as well. Lewis Hamilton, Vettel, they've both spoken out about human rights in that country. With Newcastle United, as a result of the takeover, human rights in Saudi Arabia has been brought into sharp focus. More and more people are speaking about it. Alan Shearer, in his piece in The Athletic, said that we have to educate ourselves about it, about sports washing, and says we have to open our eyes to the evidence referring to Jamal Khashoggi murder. And he's saying, we have to ask questions, and he's saying all the right things. And I think you can't. I mean, Alan Shearer, he's a Geordie legend. I mean, Geordies absolutely adore him, and when he says something like that, it carries a lot of weight. And Newcastle fans, don't get me wrong, many Newcastle fans don't care. They just want to see trophies in the cabinet, and I kind of get the thirst for it. But many others rightfully have recognised that we've got an opportunity here. We've got their ears. Let's use our voices. And it's like you say, you can buy our club, but you can't buy our silence. And they know that their voices are now heard. And Newcastle fans are and will be a lot more effective at bringing about some sort of change, some sort of relief, even if it's just for Dr. Ahmed Mustafa, even if it's just for him, bringing some relief for him, than what Boris Johnson will ever do. Newcastle fans, because they've got principles. I'm not saying Boris Johnson doesn't have principles, but I'm not saying he has principles either. But with Newcastle fans, it's different. It's, they're talking about Geordie, solid earth people, real people who care about other real people who we know about Boris Johnson's past, his eating past, and what they used to get up to as kids, and the disdain that they had for their fellow human beings. That's not the same for football fans, and we feel, human. When a few Geordie fans. I mean, I was at Anfield when Newcastle came over about 3 weeks ago, and John Shelby's goal was a stunner, by the way, and there was a few of the Geordie fans were saying, making some unacceptable remarks regarding food banks and whatnot. And this is the thing that people in Newcastle are, they're aware of what's going on with the whole problem that's going on across the country. But the vast majority of the Newcastle fans criticised that minority that said what they said, because they're human who feel for other humans. And I think this will allow them to bring about more change in Saudi Arabia than what our current government will.
Well, that would be fantastic. And on that note, thank you very much for giving us your time. We'll put up the website and the Facebook page of Sanaa, and keep on doing the good work.
Can I just raise one more case, please? I mean, there's three quick cases which I want to touch upon. Dr. Simon Alder, who tweeted that, may God bring compassion amongst the heart of the brothers, referring to Saudi Arabia Qatar rift a few years ago. He was detained as a result in prison, and then they brought forth anti-terrorism charges against him, seeking a death penalty for that tweet, when he's asking for peace and compassion between people. They use that to go after him using anti-terror legislation, which is typical of tyrannical regimes. Dr. Musa Al-Qarni recently passed away in prison, and he was killed. He was placed in a wing with some extremists. I'm talking about real extremists, and he's always been vocal against extremism, and the authorities placed him in that wing with those extremists, knowing what would happen, knowing that he would be attacked. And it got to a point that the authorities were warned this will lead to his death, and unfortunately and ultimately it did lead to his death, Dr. Musa Al-Qarni. Finally, Aida Alghandi, the mother of one of our trustees, Abdullah Alghandi, she's been held in detention with her son since 2018, not for anything that she has done, but because her son is here in the UK, voicing his opinion and highlighting the human rights violations that are happening in Saudi Arabia. So
they've locked up the mother of somebody who sent out some tweets that the Saudi kingdom doesn't like.
Not just tweets, but he's spoken actively against the Saudi regime, exposed their human rights violations.
This makes Riyadh look incredibly weak, locking up women because their sons are exercising freedom of speech, freedom of thought.
An elderly lady, she's an elderly lady. And, Abdullah Ghani is a British national, so there's nothing that the Saudis can do to him. So they've gone after his elderly mother instead.
Well, let's hope we get justice for them. Let's hope we get freedom for them. And thank you for raising those cases.
No, my pleasure. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne.
New Yorker Bilal Abdul Kareem, a journalist who is also on a mission. In fact, his decision to be a key member of the Awkward Squad got him locked up in Syria. The experience led to him launching a prisoners' charter on human rights. But will the rebel group it's aimed at take it on board?
They know full well that torture and indefinite detention and no justice in general is back. And you can't expect that they're going to continue to support a revolution that's just going to empower another dictator.
So, Bilal Abdul Kareem, tell me about this prisoners' charter and why now?
The project that we're doing is the Prisoners' Covenant. And the Prisoners' Covenant is basically a document that enshrines the rights of prisoners. And we're asking Hayat Tahrir Shem to sign this document. It calls for no torture, no confessions under torture to be admitted into court or to be used by the court. 3, no indefinite detention. And 4, transparent trials for detainees, giving them adequate opportunities to defend themselves. That's what the Prisoners' Covenant calls for.
I'd like to know who it's aimed at, because, you know, you're broadcasting from Syria. It's in the middle of a civil war. Is this the right time for any sort of initiative? You know, you're fighting the Russians, the Iranians, the Assad regime, Uncle Tom Cobley and all, you know, and is this the time?
The time for something like this actually was several years ago. Had we put forward this initiative several years ago, I think we would have been a lot further ahead than we are now. This revolution here in Syria, it was a popular revolution. And the only reason why it's still happening is because of the support of the Syrian people, which is waning, because they know full well that torture and indefinite detention and no justice in general is back. And you can't expect that they're going to continue to support a revolution that's just going to empower another dictator over them, which basically Abu Muhammad Jolani and Hayat Tahrir Sham are asking the people to do. And you asked about, you know, who is it aimed at? Well, no one had a problem with calling on the international community for help, the Muslims around the world for help back in 2011, 2012. Well, we're back again and saying the international community helped out the Syrian people a lot during those years where they really needed assistance. And we're calling upon them again, because this revolution can still be successful, but it's got to be an element in there that's saying to the people like Abu Muhammad Jolani and other than him that the Syrian people are not going to accept torture and injustice, and they need the help from around the world. Bashar al-Assad calls upon the Russians and the Iranians, and nobody has a problem to say, okay, well, why is he calling on outside help? And I don't think that the Syrian people should have a problem with calling on international help either.
To be brutally frank, Bilal, some observers might say, this guy has got an axe to grind. He's been in prison himself under HTS. You can't take him seriously. He's biased.
Well, if somebody were to say that, I'd say to them, the first thing you should look at is, well, what's Bilal asking for? What's he demanding? Does he want to be the vice president? No. Is he looking for money? No. He's looking for 4 things. 1, for people to understand that he wants no torture, no torture confessions, no indefinite detention, and clear and fair and transparent trials. If that's what he's asking for, that sounds pretty reasonable. Let's pretend for a minute that he has an agenda. Well, if that's his agenda, I would say that the 26 million Syrian people would say, I think we should give it to him. Yeah, that is my agenda. And if that's what people would call that's an axe to grind when they're asking for no torture, when I was in prison, I could hear the screams of torture all the time. Sometimes I couldn't even concentrate on my salat because I could hear people screaming from torture. So that's my agenda. My agenda is now made clear to everybody. I want no torture confessions, no indefinite detention, and fair and clear, transparent trials. That's my agenda.
You see, I remember the origins of this war, and what makes me feel really uncomfortable, I remember reporting the plight of the graffiti boys. These were schoolboys who had scrawled on a broken wall, "The regime must fall." And for that, they were all disappeared for over 20 days. And people then started demonstrating and rallying in the streets. And when the boys eventually were released, instead of pacifying the parents, it enraged them because every single one had been tortured. So it's with some irony, isn't it, that the Syrian people are fighting for a new governance, which seems very little different in some ways from the behavior of the Assad regime.
Well, I think that it's important to understand something. The Syrian people have been living under oppression for decades. It didn't start with Bashar al-Assad. It went beyond Hafez al-Assad, his father. So it is unrealistic that all of that's going to go away in just a few short years. People like Abu Muhammad Jolani and other than him learned from the regime. Unfortunately, that's all that he seems to know. Justice and dealing justly with the people is something that, well, where would he learn it? They're not implementing Islam. So why would we assume that he knows about justice? That's where the prisoner's covenant comes in. If he were to hold fast to it, the principles are derived directly from the Quran and the Sunnah. And it would be very easy to, I mean, it doesn't take rocket scientists to know that the Prophet ﷺ did not condone torturing prisoners, nor did he indefinitely detain people without adequately giving them an opportunity to defend themselves, because that's simply not Islam. So we're calling upon the international community, the Muslims around the world, anybody who thinks that justice is a good idea, to support this campaign. We're going to be using the hashtag Prisoners Covenant Syria. You can visit ognreports.news for news and information about the Prisoners Covenant. Talk about it, tweet about it, share about it. The more people who know about it, the more that we can ask, demand Abu Muhammad Jolani and Hayat Tahrir Sham to deal justly with the people. That's what we're after.
Well, it sounds like a good initiative. Good luck with that, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So my first podcast comes to an end. Will it be my last? Well, that's very much up to you. We'd love to hear some feedback of In Conversation with Yvonne Ridley. Any suggestions for future topics or guests, please get in contact. And in the meantime, stay safe and stay blessed.